So Andy, you've mentioned a couple of times that latency is a key factor for the New York Stock Exchange. Would you care to expand on that?
Certainly. It's changed dramatically over the past 8 to 10 years. I mean, I can remember a decade ago where one of our key drivers was reliability and uptime, and still is important. But when you went in for funding approval, if you could go in and say you're going to shave some number of seconds off the downtime for the year, it's approved. And if you went in and said, I can make it go, 20% faster, you had to explain the ROI and why you'd want to do that, and that's a much more lengthy process. Today, it's almost the exact opposite, where if I go in and say I can shave 10 microseconds out of this conversation before I even get done with that sentence, it's why isn't it done yet? Okay, why haven't you implemented it? But if I go in and I say I can take an extra 2 seconds off my downtime for the entire year, everybody says, all right, well, let's evaluate that closer and see what the ROI is. It's a different frame of reference that we're working in nowadays. So latency has been extremely critical. It is our competitive edge and driver. The exchanges as a whole across the planet at this point compete on microsecond differences. We differentiate ourselves in our electronic markets by some number of microseconds. That makes all the difference in the world to us.
So clearly latency is giving New York Stock Exchange competitive advantage. How does that relate to other customers, Mike?
Well, I think that they're a model for somebody who's taken a design blueprint that we've communicated to the market, which is collapse your data center, simplify it, or take a layer out of it. That helps to remove a lot of latency, because if your server, your communication between your servers has to go up 3 layers and down 3 layers, that's obviously adding latency. If you can collapse that down, that removes a lot of latency from the communication path. There's also some other benefits where it can cost you less to build it. It's a lot easier to manage that. And as a result of using fewer devices, it's going to use less power, space, and cooling. That has very widespread benefits to other markets. That's not just unique or valuable to an exchange or a financial services business. It's unique to anybody building a data center. If you could build a data center for 1,000 or 2,000 servers, and you could save capital costs in building it, and you could save costs in powering it every year and cooling it, that makes a big difference. And if the data center you're building is delivering multimedia traffic, where latency there is also important, then again, what they've done becomes a very big model for people in that specific vertical market. So I think that there's a lot of analogs in different vertical industries where what they've done is a good model to follow. And I think just in general, in having simplified their data center and lowered their costs of acquiring and operating it, is also a model across the broad industries.
I would add one of the other drivers for a very high-performance network is this idea of compacting the data centers. When I had 3 or 4 or 5 data centers spread out, I could do a medium to somewhat high-performance network. But now that I bring those 5 or 6 data centers together, I need an incredibly high-performance fabric to basically assimilate and transport all that information and data. And that's whether I'm processing stocks or multimedia applications or credit card transactions. Take your choice.
So you've adopted 10 gig for connectivity for servers, and clearly that helps with latency. Were there other reasons for this as well?
There's a couple of reasons. Latency being first on a list. Second on the list is, in our environment, jitter or outliers are extremely important, which also is very important to the folks in the video arena. And then also the last one is the bandwidth continues to grow. Let's not forget our bandwidth is still growing at double-digit rates every year. So what used to run on 100 meg now needs a gig pipe easily. And what's been running on gig pipe is now 10 gig, and if I could have 100 gig Ethernet today, that would be a good thing to have.
So going with 10 gig has given you an element of future-proofing?
An element of it. It's bought me some time in the race, and I'm looking forward to the 100 gig Ethernet.
Okay, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, as Andy says, the data center traffic and the wide area network traffic is growing in most industries at about 30% compound per year. So you just can't stand still. We can't see any limit to that growth. It's just going to carry on and carry on. There don't seem to be technology fundamental limits that are preventing it continuing. So if you've invested in 1 gig Ethernet 5 years ago, then you'll be getting to the point now where that's bursting at the seams, and you've simply got to invest in 10 gig just to keep up with traffic growth.
And from our perspective, we're just, you know, our focus is building a high-performance network, but also driving the economics. And, you know, today we can deliver 24 ports of 10 gigabit Ethernet for access connectivity in a certain price envelope. And as we have more servers coming into the market that have 10 gig native, the economics for 10 gigabit Ethernet are only going to get better. So, you know, the benefit of faster, you know, lower latency, better throughput on fewer interfaces out of a server, which again simplify the amount of cabling in the data center, are going to be accentuated by the fact it's going to actually be cheaper to build single 10 gigabit interfaces to a server rather than having multiple teamed 1 gigabit Ethernet interfaces, and they'll be easier to manage.